Where is Mashiach hiding? We are all eagerly anticipating Mashiach. We're waiting for him to arrive. Where is he hiding? Where is he hiding out that we don't see him?
Brothers, have you tried looking in Daniel 9 and verse 25? Spoiler alert, Daniel 9 and verse 26 tells us that Mashiach Nagid had to come before the end of the Second Temple period. So that means Mashiach ben David is hiding where Levi least expects to find him, in the Tanach. So maybe if you would read the oracles of Elohim in the Tanakh instead of reading your own oracles, maybe you might find the Mashiach Nagid you're looking for. Joseph will keep praying. Shalom and welcome to the Prime Minister Parasha Midrash, where Mashiach ben Yosef elect for 5776 and 5777 gives Mikra and Midrash advice to help the southern house of Judah turn away from the pedophilia and the self-idolatry that's found in the Talmud and return to Elohim's pure and clean words of Tanakh. Mishlei, or Proverbs 30 and verse 5, tells us that every word of Elohim is pure. It doesn't need improving. Verse 6 says, not to add to his words, lest he rebuke us and we be found to be liars. And in love, we don't know how else to say it. It seems like Levi's gone pathological on us. So that is why this is where Mashiach ben Yosef from 5776 and 5777 has no choice but to turn up the volume, to wake up brother Judah, and to advise the prime minister of Israel what the word of Elohim really says. Because apparently his advisors don't know, because the rabbis don't read from the Tanakh. And much worse, they're intent on faking it as if they did know. Mr. Prime Minister, leading Elohim's most important nation without studying the written Torah and without studying what the prophecies say, isn't that kind of like driving blindfolded? And if your advisors believe a book that seeks to replace the words of Elohim, how do you know you're not headed off the cliff? There is so much to say here in Parasha Shemote. We are literally beginning a new chapter and a new book in Israel's history. And it's going to be difficult to summarize what's important in 1 hour. So let's get started. What's really going on in the Exodus account? And what's the real significance of the Exodus from Egypt? The Exodus account is not just an amazing story of how Israel was oppressed by Paro and then got free with the help of Elohim. If we have eyes to see and ears to hear and brains to think, it's also the story of how Elohim took 12 or 13 brothers from 4 different mothers and forged a single unified nation out of them. And it's the story of how Judah and Joseph were formed into a single nation. And this is back in the days when Jews and Josephites were still part of the same 12 tribes, who later became the 2 houses and then 2 kingdoms. And you might not like it because the rabbis don't get to steal Joseph's inheritance, but Elohim's word says that there will be 12 tribes again in the end. Judah might keep asking Elohim to kill us with the Birchat Haminim, but Elohim's word says he will bring us home anyway. And shame on Judah and Levi for teaching anything other than Elohim's words. What are you thinking, brothers? Has the whole tribe of Orthodox Levi lost its collective minds? You're abandoning the word of Elohim. For a trip down memory lane, brothers, let's throw back to Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 15 and verse 10, where Abraham cut the sacrifices in 2. And the nation of Israel was later divided into 2 parts, Judah and Joseph. Then in verse 13, Yahweh told Abraham to know for certain that his descendants, Judah and Joseph, the Jews and the future Josephite Christians, would be strangers in the land that was not theirs. And Judah and Joseph would serve the Egyptians, and the Egyptians would afflict us and mistreat us for 400 years. Then in verse 14, Elohim said he would judge Mitzrayim or Egypt, and then all 12 tribes would come out with great possessions. And this was to be a new beginning for our new nation. The great thing about Abraham is he was willing to go anywhere and do anything for Elohim, just at his word. Abraham's loyalty to Elohim was greater than his loyalty to himself or even his only son. And not to say the wrong things, but doesn't that establish a standard for us in Israel that we all should put Elohim ahead of ourselves and even ahead of our own families? Or else, how are we being faithful to Abraham's example? And Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Yitzhak, or Isaac. Tragically, in Genesis 21 and verse 9, Ishmael mocked Yitzhak, which in the context of kingship and the birthright can be life-threatening. So sadly, Ishmael got himself sent away. And as a result, when Abraham died, the kingship passed directly to Yitzhak. Done. Because after Ishmael got himself sent away, there were no other children of the promise to receive the birthright. So it was a simple father-to-son transfer. However, in the next generation, for his part, Yitzhak had two sons, Esav and Yaakov, or Israel. Esav was the firstborn, but Esav didn't want the duties and responsibilities of the kingship. Esav preferred hunting and pleasures to the things of the Torah. So Esav would have been a very bad king. And in contrast, Yaakov valued the things of Torah. So Yaakov traded Esav fair and square for the kingship. And it's not nice, but someone had to do a good job of being king. And Esav, he didn't express a desire to do the job. So it pretty much had to be done. That part is easy. The only hard part is if you're going to be king, you pretty much need the blessing to go along with the kingship, or else your kingship is going to be ineffective. Elohim forbid. So Yaakov had the kingship, but now what happened? Yaakov only wanted one wife, but because he played tricks on other people played tricks on him, and he got 4 wives. Now he had 12 or 13 sons. So to which one of his 12 or 13 sons would Israel pass the kingship so that all of his children were treated fairly and given a good and glorifying witness to Elohim's name? Well, last week we saw that Reuven defiled himself sexually. Ouch. So he's out. Then we saw how Shimon and Levi defiled themselves through cruelty, both toward Joseph and toward Shechem, and wiping out a whole village. And Levi would do well to consider that deeply. Then the kingship passed to the 4th round draft choice, which was brother Judah. And Judah didn't exactly rape Tamar. It was more like Tamar seduced Judah through trickery because Judah was playing tricks on her. That's how that works. And then to make matters even more interesting, Judah didn't actually become king until the era of kings. So what was Israel to do in the meantime? The kingship could perhaps be called the temporal priesthood because it ministers to the nation regarding those things that are affected by time. We'd have to unpack it in some other place, but effectively we're talking about lawyers, guns, and money. And it's not nice to say, but the reality is that until Elohim establishes the millennial reign and helps Judah and Joseph to fix up the world and establish the Genesis 35 alliance, you need someone good in charge of your army, because until Mashiach's millennial reign is established, there will always be huge upheavals. And if we want to survive those upheavals, then we'd better put as king the very best that we have with lawyers, guns, and money, because we're going to need him as a practical matter. But the only thing is, if we also want to survive in the long run, our king had also better obey Elohim carefully and closely. Devarim, or Deuteronomy 17 and verse 18, says that the king shall write for himself a copy of this written Torah of Moshe in a book. And it should be the same written Torah as the one before the Levitical priests. And he needs to consult Elohim's oracles daily so he knows how to lead his nation to do what Elohim says rather than what the rabbis say in the Talmud. And that's because Judah Hanasi is not Mashiach Nagid of Daniel 9 and verse 25. Sorry, Judah Hanasi is not one like Moses. Well, apart from the kingship, then you have the priesthood. And the priesthood represents the timeless king, who is Yahweh. And the temple is sort of like his embassy. And the priests are kind of like his ambassadors or his embassy staff. And the priesthood is supposed to advise the faithful king as to what the oracles of Elohim command and counsel him, so the king can then implement the words of Elohim. Now, obviously, the king is supposed to read and study on his own, but he has many other things to do. So the priesthood's job is to be there with the in-depth knowledge of what to do according to Elohim's oracles. But what does the king do when the priesthood counsels him with their own words instead of Elohim's words? It's like Korach's rebellion all over again, isn't it, brothers? Apart from the kingship and the priesthood, then you have the prophets, and the prophets are basically quality control. So when you get a selfish or a corrupt king or a corrupted priesthood, like we have today with the rabbis, that's normally when Elohim raises up a prophet. And the job of a prophet is basically to risk his life, to call out evil and corruption in the kingship and the priesthood and the people. And there are two different kinds of prophecy. And the first kind is the kind everyone thinks of, which is foretelling. It's when the prophet foretells or predicts what's going to happen in the future. Thus says Yahweh, Judah and Ephraim will be sorry if they don't wise up and start following Elohim's words 100% seriously, as if their lives depended on it. That sort of thing. The second kind of prophecy is when the prophet hears words from Elohim and then speaks forth that which he hears. And that's called forthtelling. And Judah and Levi almost never like hearing either foretelling or forthtelling. Same with the house of Joseph, Ephraim. They don't like to hear it because they want to get away with their sin. So now in context of the rest of the Parasha series, beginning here in Parasha Shemote, we're talking about Moshe. Who was Moshe? Why was Moshe that way? Moshe was a shofet, or an anointed judge. And without getting too deep, anointed judges are different than appointed judges, in that appointed judges and officers are appointed by men. That's a legitimate function. Deuteronomy calls for it. However, anointed judges are always anointed by Elohim. It's a divine level of selection. And in contrast to Talmud tractate Eruvin 21b and other "we are more important than Yahweh" fantasies by the Talmudic rabbis, the authority of an anointed judge is actually much greater than the authority of the kingship or the priesthood when he's delivering his message. Because why? Because he's delivering a message from Elohim. And he's anointed by Elohim typically to carry out a special transitional task. It's like brain surgery we're talking about here. And Elohim wants things done just exactly a certain way. It has to be done just right, according to the plan shown on the mountain, or whatever plan Elohim gives. But how does this anointed judge know what just right is? How does he know what Elohim wants? Well, first and foremost, before an anointed judge or any kind of a prophet does anything, he prays and then he listens carefully for the voice of Elohim, concept, and then he obeys it and also shares what the voice tells him with others. That's his job. It requires basically turning yourself into a human antenna so you can hear what Elohim wants to say whenever he wants to say it. and your life is no longer your own. Not that our lives should be our own to start with, but now it's really not your own. And get ready for people to talk bad, because Judah and Joseph, they like being protected and served by Yahweh Elohim, and they like singing and dancing, and they like a lot of pretend. But they don't seem to like obeying Elohim's words with precision. And a lot of people think Moshe was Jewish, but Moshe was actually a Levite. And Moshe was a prophet, although he served in the kingship. The key thing that made it all work, that is typically forgotten and despised in practice, is the same thing that everyone prays for, but almost no one does. Moshe, what set him apart, he was constantly listening and constantly submitted to what he heard from Elohim at all times. The same thing used to be true of King David, at least in his early years. There was a perfect relationship between divine and man. Elohim spoke, Moshe wrote. He didn't make it up on his own. In Shemote, or Exodus chapter 4 and verse 12, Elohim told Moshe what to say, and Moshe said that. Are we getting a feel for the kind of relationship that the commander of the armies of Israel wants from his soldiers? The commander says what to do. Moshe did it. And he was counted as a faithful servant. So why is it today, brothers, that seems like Levi can't wait to rewrite the Torah to make it more like Genesis 3 and verse 4? Elohim already said what to do. Now all we need to do is do what Elohim said without making changes to his word. That's it. Life in the priesthood is just like life in the spiritual army. You suit up and you show up, and then he tells you what to do and you do it. That's it. But not one time in the military or in the business sector did I ever get an order to rewrite all of the corporation policies and rules to suit myself and then pretend as if I hadn't made any changes to it. In the military, I'd be up on court-martial proceedings if I did that. And rightfully so. But doesn't Levi expect to rewrite the Tanach in each generation? Are you serious? You just read a number of books and now you're able to issue a brand new Torah to replace the one that Elohim gave? Are you serious? Or is it a joke? Mr. Prime Minister, how would you feel if you gave an order as the chief executive and then your staff decided to rewrite your orders, inverting and changing the meanings to suit themselves? Oh, and then they tell everyone, no. They're just disseminating the prime minister's instructions. This is what the prime minister said to do. How would you feel, Mr. Prime Minister? What would you do if your staff were to do a horrible thing like that? Elohim forbid. Can anyone see the parallels, or do we have to be autistic to see that? You know, in the Garden of Eden, all we had to do was listen for what Elohim said to do and then do it. That's it. That's all we have to do. And in Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 2, we see that Levi's job was to teach the words of the written Torah to Israel without changing anything. That's it. And I don't really know how to say this, but to speak the truth in love, this is probably going to be really a struggle for Levi, is to realize he's not actually the demigod that he thinks he is. And he doesn't actually have the authority to rewrite Elohim's marital covenant like he thinks he does. And we know you're not going to like it, but our prayer is that you will face facts and repent so that you can survive what's coming. Because Elohim doesn't like his words replaced with the Talmud. He doesn't like that one bit. Verses like Shemote, or Exodus 24 and verse 4 tells us that Moshe wrote down all the words of Yahweh. And in places like Devarim or Deuteronomy 31 and verse 9, we'll see that Moshe wrote this Torah and delivered it to the priests, the sons of Levi, and to all the elders of Israel. We're not talking about oral Torah here. We're talking about we're talking about the Chumash, perhaps minus the commentary. And verses like Deuteronomy 12 and verse 32 say not to change Elohim's words for any reason, lest it's no longer his Torah, but now it's our own. Why would you do that? Why would you even think about changing the words of Elohim? I mean, to Joseph, that's like unhinged. In Deuteronomy 17 and verse 18, we'll see that when the king sits on the throne of his kingdom, he's supposed to take the copy from before the Levites and write for himself a copy of the written Torah that was given to the sons of Levi to maintain. And there's no mention of a so-called oral Torah in the written Torah. But why Moshe? What was special about Moshe? Let's ask that. Okay. Moshe was a Levite, but Moshe was not an enticer to replace the written Torah with the Talmud of men. In contrast, Moshe was a pure son of Levi who listened diligently to Elohim's voice and obeyed him. Moshe was a prophet to both houses, both to Judah and to Joseph. He was a prophet both to the Jews and to the future Josephite Christians, just as it is today. Amen. But what made Moshe special is that he listened diligently for Elohim's voice 24/7, forgotten concept, and hastened to do everything Elohim said. Concept. And we'll see that this trait, if we don't remember anything else, we'll see that this trait of spiritual shema'ing that everyone prays for, but almost no one understands and no one does, is what the prophets like Moshe and Yeshayahu and Yeshua all did so well. You know, each day we pray the great Shema in Deuteronomy 6 and verse 4, that we would hear his voice and obey it. This Shema doesn't just mean hear. Shema means hear and then do. Except that almost no one practices this because almost no one reflects on what Elohim says he wants. To put ourselves in Elohim's shoes, so to speak, just for a moment. We don't do that. We say we love him, but we don't think about what he wants. Are you serious? It's unbelievable. You know, we have Jews and Josephites who want to take leadership roles to lead Elohim's people to victory, but they don't even know what Elohim wants. Are you joking? You know why Moshe is great? It's because Moshe did what Adam and Hava were supposed to have done way back in Genesis 3. Moshe made a point of hearing what Elohim said. And then, shocker of shockers, Moshe actually hastened to do and preach what he heard without changing it, without alteration. Moshe didn't rewrite what he heard. He just rejoiced that he was allowed to receive the word, preach it, and lead the people to do it. Concept. But today, it's like the rabbis figure as soon as they've read enough books, we're not talking the Tanach, we're talking commentary books on the Tanach. As soon as Judah's read enough commentary books on the Tanakh, now they're qualified to replace the constitution that Elohim gave to Israel through Moshe. In love, brothers, what are you thinking? Did you get some bad Knebosem? You got some bad ergot fungus back in the Mishnaic era? What? Oh, hey, I know. How about the rabbis imitate the greatest Levite of all time? The one who always listened to Elohim and did whatever Elohim said, and then wrote down what Elohim said without changing the message. Perhaps we could imitate him in the Levitical order. But some posek will say, no, you don't understand. Moshe had to establish the Torah for his generation, and we're just doing what Moshe did. We're just doing the same thing, except the Posakim are not doing the same as what Moshe did. The Posakim are doing the opposite of what Moshe did, because Moshe didn't read a whole bunch of books and then think up the Torah from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's not what Moshe did. Rather, Moshe heard the Torah from Elohim's mouth and wrote that down. Is Levi able? Are you capable of telling the difference? Brothers, this has got to stop. Well, for the Haftarah prophetic portion, Judah and Levi do seem to make themselves easy targets. And sad to say, they kind of need it. But the problem is, so does Ephraim. And according to this week's Haftarah prophetic portion, the house of Ephraim needs a wake-up call even more than the house of Judah. Because right now, Ephraim's walk is still so much like the walk of the house of Esav that Orthodox Judah can't even recognize Ephraim as being Hebraic. Because to Judah, it seems like a bunch of kids playing silly kids' games. Let's let that sink in for a moment. Judah expresses he doesn't know who we are because we kind of, sort of, maybe look like Hebrews, but we don't behave like Hebrews. Now, for balance, remember that Judah has problems of their own. Judah also has us, has Joseph, under a death curse, which directly violates Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3. And that's probably not going to change until after Armageddon, which is like the encore of World War IV several decades from now. However, Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 10 tells us that at the end of the encore of World War IV, Judah will look on him whom they pierced. They will grieve for him as one grieves for the loss of his firstborn. The reality is that Judah will probably continue to ask for Joseph's death until that time. And because Judah and Levi are such loving, faithful brothers who want nothing more than to put the words of Elohim first, that's why Joseph can't come home, right? Brothers, listen, the reason we're talking to Judah and Levi in this way, this isn't our choice. This is what you leave us with. Even though you treat us evilly, and even though you make evil plans for our women and children, Joseph still wants Judah and Levi to survive. However, Joseph also knows that the only way you can survive what's coming is to do what the Tanach says to do, which is to listen for Elohim's voice and obey it, to include all of his written commandments, because we're responsible for everything Elohim ever said. We're going to see that about 20 times as we proceed through the Parasha series. And I don't know who wrote the Haftarah prophetic portion. I don't know why anyone put 3 short snippets in Isaiah all right next to each other. Joseph prefers to read cover to cover anyway. It just makes sense to read the whole chapters rather than cherry pick what you like from the Tanakh to fit your narrative. Joseph prefers to read cover to cover to get the full context. And, well, the full context of this passage is Ephraim. So Yeshayahu, or Isaiah chapter 28, starting in verse 1. Ephraim is special. He doesn't have to do anything. Oh, no, wait. It says, woe to the crown of pride, the spiritual drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which is the head of the verdant valleys, to those who are overcome with spiritual wine. And we'll unpack this in the Abraham Accords in the Four Horses series, but verse 3 tells us that the time is coming when the crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, will be trampled underfoot. What does that look like, brothers? Does that look like Yahweh is happy with the Messianic movement resting and reading and making yourselves comfortable and really not doing much of anything else? Good thing we had Jewish apostles, so something actually got done back in the first century. Verse 7, but the drunkards of Ephraim also have erred through spiritual wine. Imagine that. And through intoxicating spiritual drink, they are out of the way. Oh, what does that mean? Out of the way. That sounds bad. It sounds like they're on the wrong road or something, doesn't it? The priest and the prophet have erred through intoxicating drink. They are swallowed up by spiritual wine. They are out of the way through intoxicating drink. Oh, there's that phrase again. They err in vision, meaning they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. They stumble in judgment because they're not willing to do what their Rabbi Yeshua said. Verse 8, for look, all the tables in the Messianic marketplaces are full of mystery Babylonian doctrine, vomit and filth, like the Trinity, like book and DVD sales. No place is clean inside Ephraim's house. You'd think Ephraim was still dwelling with Esau. It's so polluted. Verse 9, so what can Elohim realistically do? To whom will Elohim teach the critical life-saving knowledge? And whom will Elohim even make to understand the message of what Ephraim needs to do in these last days to step up and not just save his life, but also to save the chastity and the freedom of his wives and his children? Who? Who can Elohim find from the house of Ephraim who even cares? Those Ephraimites who have just barely weaned themselves from the milk because that's all they care to develop themselves doctrinally? Will he teach knowledge to those Ephraimites who've just barely drawn themselves from the breasts and they're now taking strained peas and carrots, although by now they should be mature in the word and be taking meat? Verse 10, because most of Ephraim, he's Joseph's son. He's smart as a razor, but he uses it to gratify his lusts, his laziness, and his sense of entitlement. Ephraim could do so much, except he doesn't bring his A game for Elohim. Ephraim does not bring his best to the spiritual war. He doesn't try to marshal and integrate and steward all of his life's resources and abilities to give a full spectrum performance for the Son of Elohim who died to save him from paganism and idolatry. Why? Why does he not seem to care what Yeshua wants when Yeshua himself was doing his Father's will? So to not focus on what Yeshua wants means you don't focus on what the Father wants. And Ephraim makes excuses for himself. For precept must be added to precept, precept upon precept, to make a broader, easier road and to make an easier religion than the one Yeshua and his disciples all walked. For line must be added to line upon line, here a little, there a little, until now, just like Levi, Ephraim's created a new doctrine that speaks something other than what the written Torah says to do. And it's not what Yeshua did. And no one in Ephraim even seems to see the problem. Right, brothers? Verse 11. For with stammering lips and another tongue, Yahweh of armies will speak to Ephraim. Verse 12. To whom he said, obeying my voice and doing everything I ever said to do is what will bring you the rest with which you will eventually cause the weary to rest, meaning you will usher in Yeshua's Jewish millennial kingdom. And this great commission, which I have laid out in Ephesians, is the fivefold refreshing that will cause the kingdom to grow and please Yeshua if Ephraim would only obey it. Yet Ephraim wouldn't even hear. He wouldn't even incline his ear. Verse 13. Because why? Because Ephraim is capable as anything. He's Joseph's son. But do we see fruit consistent with him caring about Yeshua? Because it seems like Ephraim can't be bothered to do what Yeshua says to do. It's too hard. It's too much work. It costs too much of our money. So Ephraim has convinced himself that there's nothing to do for Elohim. There's nothing to do for Yeshua. Why? Is because Ephraim would rather play with his kids. Ephraim has other priorities than doing what his king said, even though it's the king who's going to say whether he makes it into the kingdom or not. So, details. Ephraim just stacks a few precepts and stacks a few verses, and now he's made up a whole new religion that looks nothing like what Yeshua walked. Ephraim body home. You know, the problem, brothers, is if we're not going to actually do what Yeshua says to do, then how is it anything but a Saturday church? If we're not going to do what Yeshua says to do, then isn't the horse still red? Isn't the doctrine still from Esav? You know, if you don't want to work for Yeshua and you don't want to make sacrifices to establish Yeshua's kingdom, maybe you'd prefer to go back to Esav's house and join his kingdom. Father forbid. I mean, you know, if you don't like Yeshua's program, I'm sure Esav would love to have you back. Or you can go on stacking verses and precepts and playing with building blocks like little children. You can play games with your eternal salvation. Elohim will let you. And he does this so that the vast majority of Ephraim might go and fall backward, like what they're doing right now, and be broken and snared and caught because they didn't care enough to get up off their chair and do what Yeshua said to do. And if you think judgment won't happen to you because you, quote unquote, believe on Yeshua, and you're walking a broad, easy Sabbath and feast road where you're getting together at your friend's house and breaking a little bread, but you're not really doing everything Yeshua said to do, then read this verse again, F, because you're getting an F. Because this passage is talking exactly to Ephraim. It names Ephraim at the start of the passage. So do we care to do the math? Or are we like those who are pulling the wool over our own eyes and we're daydreaming about keeping Yeshua's Torah when all we're really doing is what's easy and free? Ephraim's fine making sacrifices just as long as they're easy and free. Just so long as service to Elohim doesn't take too much of Ephraim's money and doesn't take too much of Ephraim's time, then Ephraim's good with it. As long as Ephraim can live his life in the world, he's perfectly fine with worshiping Yeshua. The only question, brothers, is do we have any real men in Ephraim? Because every time I've ever heard this passage preached in an Ephraimite sermon, it's always used to talk about the failures of the house of Judah and the alleged superiority of the lazy, privileged Ephraimite messianic way. And the sad thing is that the failures of the house of Judah really are too real. They're not walking the right way, but neither are we, brothers. So if everything is okay, then why are we this way? Why does Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 22 tell us that although Israel or Ephraim shall be as numerous as the sand of the sea in these end times, yet only a remnant of Ephraim will return? Look around in your assembly. Who are we talking about? And that the destruction decreed shall overflow with righteousness, because Ephraim didn't care about the one who died to save his life. He didn't care what Yeshua wants, which is the same as what his father wants. So he didn't care what Yahweh wanted. Oh, are they out of the way? You know, in the East, you have the concept of faith. If someone saves your life, you owe him your life. And Yeshua was a Middle Easterner because the land of Israel lies in the Middle East, not in the Midwest. So Yeshua saved our lives, and now all we want to do is to play with our kids. So now our women and children come before Elohim. Is that Abraham's example? Is that Moshe's example? Question, brothers. Is anyone in Ephraim really planning on putting Elohim first, like Moshe did? Is anyone in Ephraim planning on doing everything the renewed covenant says to do? I haven't met any leadership like that outside of Nazarene Israel. I don't know how to say this. I was on the Noahide Keruv Identity Snatchers channel watching a video by a Talmudic identity thief where he accuses Ephraim of establishing a new religion for ourselves and practicing what he calls Torah light. And I wrote to correct him and tell him what's really going on with Ephraim, not that he'll listen. And then it hit me. It's like, wait a minute. You know, the reason Rabbi Reuven can't tell Ephraim is Hebraic is because Ephraim doesn't look Hebraic to him.
Noahides like the Torah a lot. They like Judaism a lot, but they don't want to convert, or they can't convert. Fine, that's not a problem. You don't have to convert. But you have to make sure you act like a Noahide. Don't act like a Jew. Why? Because if you're a Noahide and you keep Shabbat, that's not a mitzvah. That's a sin. It's called stealing. And one of the 7 Noahide laws is you're not allowed to steal. A Noahide that keeps Shabbat is not going to Gan Eden because he's violating the Noahide laws. Now, are you allowed to have a nice dinner on Shabbat? Enjoy. Are you allowed not to work on Shabbat? You don't have to work. It's up to you. But don't not work because it's Shabbat. Don't not drive because it's Shabbat. Don't not, turn on the light because it's Shabbat. Don't not turn on the light because you don't feel like it. If you start keeping Shabbat like a Jew, as a Noahide, you have a very serious problem. And the Rambam says it's either that you're going to be considered a thief or that you're starting a new religion.
Now, I don't know how else to say this, but just to speak the truth in love. Judah has his problems, but Judah has his strengths too. And we're going to see throughout this Parashah series that brother Judah does things Ephraim won't even consider doing, even though it's well within Ephraim's capabilities. We'll see that Judah organizes like the Torah commands. Judah tithes in support of the national mission. And Judah thinks nothing of it. Judah has big problems, just like Ephraim, but at least Judah knows you're not going to outgive Elohim. You're not going to do more for Elohim in his kingdom than Elohim's going to do for you. You don't have to protect yourself so that you don't have to hide from Yahweh because you're scared to give your tithe. Judah trusts that if he will do what the Torah says, if he will organize as a nation, and then do everything that's necessary to maintain that nation, that Elohim will then bless them for that. And Elohim does, because we're talking about trust. And you say, well, they're the richest people on earth, so they can afford to tithe. How does Ephraim think Judah got to be the richest people on earth? Judah got to be that way because why? Because they organize, they discipline themselves, and they tithe in support of the operation. That's it. They don't live in a dream world. They live in the reality. So what's Ephraim's problem, brothers? He hates money. He hates blessings from Elohim. He hates having a homeland. I had to see Rabbi Reuven's point. I mean, I did defend this, but afterwards I thought, Ephraim says Torah, 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 but he doesn't mean it. What Ephraim means is whatever's easy and whatever's free. What Ephraim means is resting together and breaking bread together and holding a Bible study over at your friend's house. And then Ephraim conveniently forgets all those parts about organization and operational principles and fulfilling the Great Commission together. Why? because Ephraim wants to make sacrifices that are easy and free. You know, did you ever wonder if Yeshua was here today, would he really think about the level of dedication and commitment among the people that he suffered and died for? And for the Nazarene among us, and you know who you are, Luke chapter 9 and verse 2 tells us that Yeshua sent out his 12 shaliachim to preach the kingdom of Elohim. And we'll see in this series how Moshe was sent to draw out of Egypt the nation of Israel, and then to organize them and to get them to behave as one single nation of Elohim. And we'll see many lessons that those few Ephraimites and Jews who want to survive the tribulation that's coming can use to survive it. But the difference is, you don't just learn the knowledge, you have to apply it to yourself and your walk. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 14, Yeshua told his disciples to sit down in groups of 50. And what we'll see as this Parasha series progresses is that Yeshua was just applying the same recommendations from Moshe's father-in-law Yitro, that the armies be organized by tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. Ephraim and dedication, it's amazing. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, Yeshua said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his self-humbling device daily and follow me, taking the path I have taken, walking the walk I have walked, keeping the same religion Yeshua kept, which was Judaism with the full Torah. Verse 24. For whoever desires to save his life in his free time will lose it, but whoever chooses to lose his life in his free time for my sake, meaning the sake of building his Father's kingdom, will save it for eternal life. That's a good investment, brothers. And then in Luke chapter 9 and verse 30, Yeshua is transfigured. He's talking with Moshe and Eliyahu. Only, does Yeshua rebuke Moshe and the Torah in the presence of Eliyahu? Or were Moshe, Eliyahu, and Yeshua all three in agreement in that passage? And then in Luke 9 and verse 62, Yeshua tells us that no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of Elohim. What does he mean? He means basically no one who's not chomping at the bit to grow Yeshua's kingdom for him as much as he can is even fit to be Yeshua's subject. Check it out in the Day of Judgment. And I wish we had more time, but we had to cut it off somewhere. So we cut it at 13 pages because Judah likes that number. So join us again next week as we see how Elohim prepares to take 12 or 13 separate tribes and forge them into a single standalone entity, like the nation of Israel will one day be again. Two houses united as one. So please pray diligently for Yahweh to raise up a King Josiah figure for the house of Judah, to turn our loving brother Levi back to Elohim's words in the Tanach, that they might survive what's coming. And please pray for the Sanhedrin to wake up and realize the Talmud is not the word of Elohim, and that you're not supposed to kill Joseph for insisting on practicing the Tanakh. And Joseph loves Judah, but we need Judah to understand that it is your pedophile policies and your Judah on Joseph violence cycles that is stopping Joseph from coming home. So if you want Joseph to come home, pray about it, please. See you again next week for Parasha Vayera. And until then, remember to listen carefully for Elohim's still small voice, and then do everything he says to do, including all of the written commandments that we can do at this time, because we're responsible for everything he ever said to do. Shabbat Shalom.